Once in a while, every 3, maybe 4 leagues, I find a build that really resonates with me. Something that feels amazing to play. Something that has all the defenses that I'd ever want, more damage than I feel I'd ever need, and it plays well in almost all content in the game. Strength Stacking, Accuracy Stacking, Chaos Damage Jugg is that build in 3.16. However, before I talk more about the details of how the build works, I do want to give a little bit of a warning. This build is amazing. I've done wave 30 Simulacrum, I've gone below depth 500 quite comfortably, I've farmed Scourge maps, killed bosses including the Feared with Release All, and much more. There's no content in Path of Exile that I've put this build up against where I've felt it can't do it. However, it is not cheap. Do not go into this expecting to put in the bare minimum and get an amazing build. I don't know exactly how much my gear's worth. I live searched a lot of it, and therefore bought it cheaper. I also spent a significant amount of time crafting it for myself, scourging my own items, and in some cases I just got lucky. If you plan to play this build, make sure you have a minimum of 60 Exalted Orbs first, but I'd strongly suggest 80 to 100. Be warned, this may be expensive. It does everything that it's advertised as, but it's not cheap. And if you try to make it work on the absolute bare minimum, if you buy a pair of boots for around 20x, and try to go from there, you may find yourself disappointed. Not every build I make is expensive. In fact, I make a lot of far cheaper builds that are League Start appropriate. And if you're more interested in one of those, then be sure to sub to the channel, because when next League rolls around, I will be making more cheaper builds. However, as the League goes on, and as I have more and more wealth myself, there are things that I look to play that a normal person wouldn't necessarily be able to. I don't think it's reasonable to not play a good build just because it might be expensive and just because not everyone can afford it. So if you do like expensive and powerful builds, well, my next build is also probably going to be expensive and powerful, as I've been farming up for a Mage Blood, and I'm definitely going to use it in the next character. And so if high-end builds sound interesting to you, be sure to keep an eye out in the near future for that as well. But now, onto the mechanics of Strength Stacking, Accuracy Stacking, Chaos Damage Juggernaut. Starting with the boots, this is the core of a build. You can't start the build without this. The build doesn't work without this item. In fact, it's all of your base damage. Your base damage is 1 to 80 chaos damage to attacks per 80 strength. From there, to enhance this, I use the Paradoxica sword. This means that my attacks will always deal double damage, and it comes with crit strike chance, fixes some attributes, and gives Chaos Pen. I know a lot of people might be thinking about Replica Frost Breath. That simply won't cut it here. You won't always be chilling enemies, and running skitterbots is a significant tax on the build. It's why so many of the Strength Stacking Occultists do so on Occultist. And it's also why some of them are so squishy, because they're running skitterbots to make sure they chill everything. Paradoxica is also a sword, and because you're positioned right near the Fortify nodes, you don't really need Overlord. Instead, you can go for sword nodes, which have better accuracy, better damage, and give you frenzy charges for free. The next piece of this unique Exodia is the Iron Fortress. The Iron Fortress gives you chance to block attack damage per 50 strength, so the build has quite a bit of attack block. Unfortunately, it also means chance to block spell damage is unlucky, so blocking spells is fairly worthless. Now it has 10% reduced move speed, but we attack so fast that we can just leap slam around, or whirling blades if you prefer, so that's not really too much of an issue. And then finally, Strength's damage bonus instead grants 3% increased melee physical damage per 10 strength. That's not relevant yet, but it will be a little bit later. Next up, there are the Oskarm gloves. These are also incredibly hard to replace. I'm using +1 to level of socketed gems so that I can fit in all of my reservations. I have a level 21 precision, which is of course level 22 from the gloves, level 22 determination, level 21 purity of elements because I didn't get 1% more res even raising the gem level, and a level 5 Enlighten support. While you don't absolutely need the Enlighten support to be level 4, this is another piece that, while expensive, is very important to the build, and your build will suffer if you don't have it. The gloves themselves grant increased global accuracy rating, crit chance per 200 accuracy, and trigger Assassin's Mark when you hit a rare unique enemy that has no mark. So you get your curse for free without having to worry about a ring suffix, you get increased crit strike chance based on your accuracy, and you get increased accuracy, which means you get attack speed because we are a Juggernaut. But now that we've formed the core of a build, we need some way to actually scale the damage. One of the big problems with builds like Battle Mage, Archmage, and even Strength Stack in the past is you had a bunch of base, but no way to scale it. And that's where Battle Mage's Cry and Redblade Banner come in. Redblade Banner says, your Warcries have infinite power. I also have 40% increased Warcry buff effect on the passive tree. Battle Mage's Cry says, the buff grants 10% increased critical strike chance per 5 power up to 30%, and the buff makes increases and reductions to spell damage also apply to attacks at 25% of their value per 5 power up to a maximum of 150%, which means 210% of spell damage is applied to attacks. And because I have Iron Will on the tree, Strength's damage bonus, the thing that's enhanced to 3% per 10 from Iron Fortress, also applies to spell damage, which means by scaling the melee physical damage from Strength, and by stacking Strength, I am able to scale my attack speed, my crit strike chance, my base damage, my increased damage, and my accuracy rating. This is an amazing amount of efficiency for a build that has so many other things going for it. And strength stacking is in one of the best spots it's been in a long time. For the remaining slots, there's nothing mechanically important here. I have an Eyes of a Great Wolf with 32% increased attributes and 98% increased global critical strike chance. The attributes role is very important. Global critical strike chance could be replaced with chaos damage, crit multi, crit chance, or even attack speed. And all of these things would be okay. You could also use a rare with something like % attributes, % strength, damage per strength, although this will be much more expensive. If you wanted a cheap alternative, you could even use something like an Astramentus, although I really don't advise that as the build felt much worse when I was using one. My belt is a rare with increased attributes, flat strength, some resists, some chaos damage, and a little bit of life. I probably should fix it by doing suffixes cannot be changed to reforge life, but like with my ring, my build does everything well enough that I'm honestly just too lazy. If you wanted to do this on a budget, this is actually one slot that you could replace, as Cyclopean Coil isn't as strong as this belt, but it is a pretty decent option, and it's far cheaper. For the rings, one ring is just there to fix resists. It does have a mana roll, which is important if you plan to run no leech maps, and the minus mana cost craft is also important if you plan to run either no leech or no regen maps. Part of the thing that I built this character around was being able to do any map mod, so there's certain tech like this that you don't really need, but is quite nice. The other ring is a synth base, and quite honestly it could be the most expensive piece of gear on this build, because there isn't an equivalent to it. It has plus strength and plus global accuracy. This gives a ton of damage over another ring. I managed to get the base fairly early on when I was planning out the build. You can use something that's just a regular ring in this slot. You could use % increased strength, flat strength, or increased global accuracy rating. If you're lucky, maybe you get something like I did, and it'll be cheap. If you're unlucky, you're probably going to be spending 40 to 50 exalts, and I don't think it's worth it at that price point. But one thing I do think is worth its price point, despite being quite expensive, is my helmet. Gain accuracy rating equal to your strength does stack with gain accuracy equal to double your strength from the Jugg Ascendancy, which means I gain accuracy equal to triple my strength. The nearby minus 12 chaos is also an incredibly powerful mod for scaling my DPS. Because I use Molten Strike for single target, I opted for the Molten Strike plus 2 projectile enchant, but you could easily have Battle Mage's Cry buff effect if you plan to just use Lightning Strike or Vol Lightning Strike. And then the prefix is something that I got very lucky with. I slammed it just off of a Beastcraft. If you don't get that lucky, you can do suffixes cannot be changed to reforge, and do it over and over until you hit it. This will be quite expensive, and it'll take probably 10 to 12 attempts. But a helmet like this is absolutely worth the price, as it crit caps you, gives you a ton of extra damage via attack speed and enemies having lower res, something that chaos damage builds in general struggle with, especially those not running Despair, and a good defensive boost from a fizz taken as fire. I would guess this probably cost you a minimum of 30 to 50x to recreate. If you want something much cheaper, you can go with Crown of Eyes, and again, if you're going to be farming super endgame content like Simulacrum Wave 21 to 30, get the good rare helmet. If you're just going to be using it for tier 16 maps, if you just want to kill the feared, Crown of Eyes is more than fine, and if you're using Crown of Eyes, you don't need the Redblade Banner. You can just use a regular old shield. You don't need to use Battle Mage's Cry. You can instead use Enduring Cry, and you can get some extra life recovery that way, although using Redblade Banner and Battle Mage's Cry will still be more damage even with Crown of Eyes. And so you might want to also consider a non-elevated version of the helmet, with gain accuracy equal to your strength, and nearby enemies have -9 to chaos res. For my Lethal Pride, I was looking for as many strength nodes as possible, things like 5% increased strength or 20 to flat strength. I did end up getting 2 of those, along with some attack leech, which helps because when I'm not using Crown of Eyes, I don't have any good source of generic attack leech. And chance to intimidate enemies for 4 seconds on hit, which is a nice bonus, but not necessarily all that important. Now, my Watcher's Eye has increased attack speed while affected by precision, and 30 life on hit for each enemy hit while affected by vitality. In terms of this, the life gain on hit is incredibly important. Get that and make sure to divine it up as close to 30 as possible, as that's where most of your sustain is going to come from. I forget how much I paid for this Watcher's Eye, but I don't think it was particularly expensive, at least not compared to a lot of the rest of the gear. If it happens to have risen since then, just go with a Vitality mod. Now, if the footage up to this point has been a bit confusing because you can't quite tell what skill I'm using, that's because I'm using 2 different skills. It's also why I have a white socket in my chest. Technically, if you're not doing super high-end content, you can pick one skill and go with it. But if you want to do everything in the game, I do suggest 2, because strike skills are kind of garbage, and there's none that are really the best at absolutely everything. If I'm just going around and mapping, I'm going to be using Lightning Strike with Vol Lightning Strike. It's incredibly fast, it's incredibly efficient, and it feels more like a range build than most range builds that you're going to be playing. On the other hand, if you want to do something like Deep Delve, or kill things in an enclosed area, you'll want to switch out Lightning Strike for Molten Strike, as Molten Strike has a lot more single target damage, and its damage is a lot more concentrated in a small area. Finally, if you want to deal with something like a boss, then you're going to be using Molten Strike, and you're going to be switching slower projectiles in place of Awakened Ancestral Call. This way, your build will be able to effectively overcome all aspects of the game. For example, if I'm doing maps or Scourge maps, I'll be Lightning Strike. If I'm killing Cirrus or doing the Feared, I'm going to be slower proj Molten Strike. If I'm delving or doing something like Wave 30 Simulacrum, then I'm going to be using Molten Strike, but keeping Awakened Ancestral Call. One other quick and very important note, I have Wither here via Withering Step. To automate it, to cut down on the number of buttons that I have, I am applying it via Leap Slam, so don't forget to Leap Slam when you're on bosses. Yes, in theory, this is a slight DPS loss, as you're losing 2 attacks, but it saved me a button, and I was already running out of room, so it felt well worth it. My original concept for this build was a Deep Delver, playing Molten Strike, and it was based off of a POB made by Mothra Elite, one of the best delvers in Path of Exile. However, as I kept looking at it, I kept tweaking things and adapting them, because it did look very good for delving. It was a fire-based strength stacking Molten Strike Jugg, using Paradoxica and using a lot of a similar scaling. But I wasn't quite happy with the fact that it was just made for delving. I wanted something that could also do bossing. I wanted something that could also do mapping. So I ended up going with Chaos Damage because it felt far easier to scale the base. One problem with the original fire strength stacking version is, while you got really good scaling from Pen and enemy res shred, it was very hard to get base damage for Paradoxica. Replica Alberons fixed that quite easily. From there, I just threw it up against a bunch of different content. When it did well against the content, then I kept doing what I was doing. When it did poorly, like when I struggled against wave 28 to 29 Kosis, I adapted the build. It's why, for a while, I was using a rare shield with Chaos Res, and I had Chaos Res on both rings. That was before I switched off of Crown of Eyes and switched to the Synth ring. Now, ultimately, I got bored of just running Simulacrum, but if you are running Simulacrum, I do strongly advise making sure you are Chaos Res capped, and because a Synth ring isn't super important to a build, that is one of the things that you could drop. Since then, I've used the build to quickly farm Scourge maps. I've used it to quickly Scourge maps. I've delved to depth 550 plus, I've killed Crystal King at that depth, and it honestly wasn't that difficult. I was able to face tank most of his abilities. I've used it to kill the Feared. In fact, I used it to farm the Feared for a bit before I realized that I was kind of just wasting money. I did the same with the Hidden, and that was also kind of a waste of money. I did about 10 Simulacrums. I only ended up bricking one of them, and that's because I got really nasty mods with triple extra damage, double pen turbo. Yeah, that was just awful. I was able to do Delirious mapping, no problem. In fact, I didn't even notice the Delirium level because everything just kind of died. I've been able to do logbooks, and I don't really read mods. The other thing is, when I buy Scourge mods, I read one line of text. Does it have a 12k fizz hit or higher? If not, it's an easy map. This build is incredibly powerful. Strength stacking scales incredibly well. I'm sure if I put a mirror into this character, even with how good my gear is now, it would feel even more amazing. So I already know this is going to be a build that I look back on fondly. It's easily my favorite build in recent history. And on top of that, it feels great to play. It's a truly powerful build, it's one of the best builds that you can play this league, and it fully justifies the expense of the gear. If you want to know more about the build, such as specifics of the tree that I took, be sure to check out the POB down in the description below. But for now, I'll leave you with this question. What is a build that you played in the past that felt incredible, that handled all content that you put it up against, and not only handled, but utterly destroyed? What build did you play that made the game feel like easy mode? As always, I'd love to hear your thoughts down in the comments below. Thank you for watching, and again, a special thanks to my patrons and YouTube channel members. If you want to support me, you can do so by clicking the links down in the description below, or on screen right now. You can also support by making purchases through my Nexus page. Or if you just want to chill and hang out, be sure to join the Discord. Again, links for everything are down in the description below. Thank you, and have a great day.